First up is Wonka, which is an origin story for the character of Willy Wonka, who was created by Roald Dahl. And if you were to ask me, where on my list of characters does Willy Wonka rank of people who need an origin story told, I'd tell you towards the very, very bottom. Because I love the idea that this is just like a madman confectioner who lives in a factory with a questionable labor source and a questionable ingredients list. Love it. How does he make the ingredients that make people float? Is any food safety inspections happening? Probably not. Also, love Gene Wilder in the role. I think he brings this sort of sense of whimsy, but also darkness to it. But you have Timothée Chalamet playing the young version of him in this origin. And I think Timothée Chalamet is a fine performer and entertainer. I think he's really great in something like Call Me By Your Name. But the more roles I see him in, the less he's not an actor who disappears. And that's not the worst thing. But when you have these huge shoes to fill in terms of Gene Wilder's performance, I don't see how we got to this hopeful, saccharine sweet version of it to the version of Willy Wonka we see in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And an important distinction is, this feels very much cut out of the line of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory versus the Tim Burton Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which has, Johnny Depp and is its own level of unhinged. But, you have Timothée Chalamet eventually potentially becoming a Gene Wilder. My fear with this is that there's a missing middle movie that they're planning on that shows how things go awry and why he closes the gates and all that stuff. But I don't want any of that. I really just don't. I'm sorry. The other thing about casting a Timothée Chalamet is this is a musical and he can't really sing, but they have him full on sing. And I'm just thinking, why? What, you have your pick of actors. This is a big name film. There's a lot of money behind it, clearly. I know he's a draw and all that stuff, but he can't really sing, so why would you rely on him? And I think, Gene Wilder, not known for his singing, but they found a way to, write around that. They just lead into it. I'm like, why have you done this to yourselves? I also have been trying to figure out, is this for a nostalgic audience? Is this for, at this point, potentially even the grandkids of a nostalgic audience? Is this for new audiences? I think it skews towards the latter of those. There are some, especially musical themes that harken back to the original film, but for the most part, it feels like it's trying to sort of create this universe, but then it's also constrained by this idea of we have to explain Oompa Loompas, which they sort of do, but then they also, I'm like, why is Hugh Grant playing the Oompa Loompa, and why is he so much smaller than the Oompa Loompas we eventually see in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? This movie left me with so many more questions than I started, and I am very, again, afraid that they will try to answer those, where the answers, there's no world in which the answers are satisfactory. The whole point is magic, mystery, and whimsy, and this is trying to destroy that in its own sense. The other thing I have to say, from a visual standpoint, I love candy, I love chocolate, I love sweets, I have a huge sweet tooth. I watched the original film. When Gene Wilder bites into that butter cup, it just makes this crunch. It has this sound. I'm sure it was styrofoam or something awful and toxic, but it just looks so appealing, and he sells it. There's tiny spoiler. There's an homage to that in this, and I was like, I don't want to eat the thing that you've just. It doesn't look right, and none of the food in this made me want to eat it. Versus the '70s version, where I was just like, I'm so hungry for candy right now. I was not hungry during watching this. It's a whole movie about candy and food and all this sort of stuff. It just felt like a Splenda or a sweetener substitute where it's still sweet, but the original flavor is missing there. Not to knock Splenda, I use Splenda, but you know the analogy I'm making. The rest of the cast is fine. You do have some big names. You have Oscar winner Olivia Colman in it. You've also got, Keegan-Michael Key, Natasha Rothwell, Rowan Atkinson. As I mentioned, Hugh Grant plays the Oompa Loompa. Matt Lucas is in it. You've got folks like Patterson Joseph, Jim Carter, Matthew Bainton, Sally Hawkins, and then Calla Lane plays this younger character who I feel like they introduced to try and be a more serious grounding to this version of Willy Wonka, which again doesn't quite make sense to me because he's a fully grown adult, and like I said, whimsy, all this stuff. So how does he become eventually this curmudgeonly, fed up with the world has betrayed him character? I don't care enough to ask the question truly. The music is not, I don't remember a single song from it, quite frankly. There are the bits of the tunes from the original ones that wove in. That's about it. I mean, I hate to admit this. One of the best parts is Hugh Grant as the Oompa Loompa in it, because you can tell how much he hates being the Oompa Loompa in it, and the character mirrors that. So he's giving the most accurate and earnest performance. by hating being this movie, it is also incredibly disturbing to watch this tiny CG version of him where it's his face mapped onto a fully CG character that does not look right. It does not look right. I fully hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I'm sorry. I try not to use that word, but I hate the visuals of the Oompa Loompa in this. Like I said, the story is whatever. It's whatever. I don't know. It's just my big takeaway from it. I'll go into in a round table, but again, the music, not that exciting. The performances, fine. I don't even think I really laughed much, if at all. I didn't get to see it with an audience that had younger folks in it, so I don't know how kids will react to it, but I don't get the sense that they're going to gravitate towards it. I feel like actually, in some sense, it's almost pandering too much to what it thinks kids might like it's doing like research or something like that, as opposed to the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which is just like, meh, we're going to throw in some dark stuff here. Like, let's see what happens. And I think people respond to that versus this, again, just saccharine substitute version. And it's such a shame because Paul King is the writer-director. He did Paddington and Paddington 2, which I think are two honestly, legitimately, like, wonderful films that are earnest, that are sweet, but not in a disgusting way, that have story and heart and warmth. And it did not translate to this world of Wonka. So, if you enjoy this film, more power to you. If you are a hardcore fan of the original and you are like a purist, definitely don't. If you are less, I don't know, if you're more flexible than me, good on you. But I just found myself really disliking the experience of watching this film and not laughing and just feeling like I was being dragged along. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. The next film I have is called Chicken Run: Dawn of the Nugget. And, in a companion to Wonka, if you were to ask me on a list of films or characters that I never need a sequel for versus an origin story, Chicken Run would be towards the top of that list because Chicken Run is one of my actual favorite films of all time. It is so funny. It's so clever. I actually rewatched it relatively recently. I think I knew that they were doing the sequel at that point, but I watched it on a plane. I was just like, this is such a good movie. And so when you have a sequel with such high expectations coming out, it's big shoes to fill, much like Gene Wilder's shoes, although I guess big beaks to fill. I'm not sure where to go here. But the idea is it doesn't take place that long after the events of Chicken Run where, spoilers, I guess, the chickens break out of a farm and they live in this little like utopia. And Rocky and Ginger, who are the protagonists of the original, come back for this one. Now, the important thing to note here is that the voice actors have changed. Tandy Newton now voices Ginger. And instead of Mel Gibson as Rocky, it's Zachary Levi. And I certainly do not want Mel Gibson back for this. I look up what he is. I don't, Mel Gibson, not forgiven. So, happy that they replaced him as an actor. However, Zachary Levi does not fit into the same mold of the character of Rocky. Like, if these characters are supposed to be older, we get fast forward a little bit, they are parents now. Zachary Levi is like de-aging in terms of character maturity, voice, and also performance and script. That is a huge part of it, but that's not who I would cast. I would expect this character who is very boisterous and very, cocky in the first one to continue that and to have the performance mirror that, but he just really took me out of this. The other thing, and not to put it all on him, but he is a huge part of this film. The other thing that I found, I didn't laugh once. Like, the jokes didn't land in this. And not that Chicken Run is like joke-y all the time, but there are some really clever jokes in there that I think that they make it brilliant. None of those are in this, or the few ones that are in there, like, the timing is off and it feels like they're trying to be like, but shh, like, look at us, we did a joke, it's a chicken joke, you remember these? We promise. There are some other changes that, I just didn't like. There are also songs in this too. I don't know why we are insistent upon forcing songs into things that don't necessarily need to be a musical. I won't spoil it, but there's some characters who come back that I'm like, weren't we done with these? Like, it feels cheap to bring them back, quite frankly. It breaks my heart to say anything less than glowing about an Aardman film, but we didn't need a sequel. This is especially to this film. The rest of the cast is rounded out by Bella Ramsey plays Molly, who is the daughter of Ginger and Rocky. You've got Imelda Staunton back. You've got Lynn Ferguson back as Mac. Nick Mohammed. But yeah, it made me sad, and I kind of wish I hadn't watched it. Like, sometimes you don't need to mess with a good thing. And the animation is fine. That's perfectly fine. I think they do still a good job with that. It wasn't enough to justify, undoing the sort of goodwill and wonderful place in my heart that Chicken Run holds. It's basically, I mean, just to cut to the chase a little bit, it's an action film, but like not a particularly compelling action film. And they're trying to be clever because they're chickens, and how would they do this? But which is sort of, the first one is an escape film, but it just doesn't click or cluck or whatever chicken joke you want to insert here. That's probably just as bad as the ones in the film. And again, it's something like, I look at Boy and the Heron from the other week, and I'm like, wow, I never thought I would give like a Miyazaki film a lower rating, or there have been some Aardman films that I haven't been as keen on, but it breaks my heart. But I'm only going to give this a 2.6 out of 5. And then the last film I have this week is called The Family Plan, and this is streaming on Apple TV Plus. I don't quite know who this one is for either, quite frankly. The idea behind it is that Mark Wahlberg is, basically a retired assassin. I don't think that's a spoiler because it's in the trailer and it's the whole premise of the movie. And, he gets sucked back into a life of action and drama, etc., etc. But now he has a family, and so it's complicated by that. And also, Ciarán Hinds plays his mentor, which is... Ciarán Hinds, great serious actor. And, Mark Wahlberg has had a few serious roles, but Ciarán Hinds, when I think of Ciarán Hinds, I think of things like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Rome and There Will Be Blood and, all these very, very serious movies. He's done other stuff, but Road to Perdition, but you've got him in this, and he plays it seriously, but you've also got Michelle Monaghan as Mark Wahlberg's wife. This is another one of those movies where I didn't laugh at all, ? There's a couple, I maybe laughed a tiny bit more, but I suppose had lower expectations. There are some very bizarre plot lines, and a lot of this could just be solved with logic, and the way most of the characters behave is illogical. And the reason I don't know who this film is necessarily for is obviously it centers around a family, but you've got this action, but he also does work that is family friendly, starring Mark Wahlberg. But there's a considerable amount of violence in this that if I was a parent of kids, I don't think I would condone watching this. And it's not funny enough, and it's not dark enough for just adults. So I don't, but it's rated PG-13. And it frustrates me that violence does not get an R rating, but other things do. But anyway, this was not memorable. If you potentially need something in the background, this might do the trick, although it's very loud, which feels like an old person complaint, but it's just a lot of superfluous action or action for action's sake. And again, some of the jokes are skew, one, I don't know if you can call them jokes, so that's its own issue, but also it's just premise, not the worst. Performances, okay. I like-ish Mark Wahlberg in this because he's not being too over the top, although his accent just comes and goes, and I'm just what is happening here? But overall, quite a skippable film. I'm going to give it a 2.4 out of 5.